I've done project management training for NC Live before, but we did it in person, and it was a much more hands-on experience. I made people build skyscrapers out of marshmallows and pasta. So this is going to be as far from that as possible, but I'll try to do the best I can do under the circumstances. You know, life has changed for everyone quite a bit. So forgive my children who are in the background fighting my wife doing schoolwork right now. So we are trying to find some balance there too. That's a project in and of itself. But a little bit of background for me real quick. I work at NC State Universities. I am their finance director in the libraries. I've been there about 5 years. Before that, I worked at the North Carolina State Budget Office, where I had a decent amount of project experience, and then started off as a teacher. So I've run a few different backgrounds, had exposure to a lot of different types of projects. So that's where I'm starting from. And then part of being picked up by NC Live is that the NC State University Libraries has run a project management training for our staff over the past 2 years. So I've been involved in that, and we've had a decent amount of success. We've had over 30 staff members go through it. We've had some pretty good feedback. Unfortunately, today we have about an hour to work with. You know, we had 9 months to go through project management training with our staff. So this is going to be a very high level overview and much more of a starting point rather than some sort of culmination. So I'm going to try to touch on some things that I think are important in terms of project management, probably some areas that you can look at improving individually, and then thinking about how to apply them to team settings. So that's kind of the starting point. So feel free to stop at any point. Devin said we're going to have a few questions along the way. I would like to have some people too. So I can't see the chat, but Devin, I guess you can let me know when that happens, or if people have questions or comments or things like that.
Yeah, sure. I'll let you know.
Great. So I wanted to start somewhere that I thought was a good example of a project gone wrong. So this is about Iowa, and it feels like a lifetime ago. And this is not about the Iowa election, but more about how the caucus turned out for people. So, you know, just about 2 months ago, Iowa was running the first political test for the nation. It is a prominent spot, as all of you know, and they ran into several problems. So I thought that was a great spot for NC State University Libraries to look at project management. I thought it was also applicable here, more in the sense of what not to do. So I went back and looked at the New York Times, and they said how the Iowa caucuses became an epic fiasco. So again, just looking at this with a total project management lens. So if you recall, before the world kind of turned and went all to COVID-19, in Iowa, they had a need to modernize the Iowa caucuses. And they were looking at rolling out a technology solution, a app to get data from the caucus sites to the state offices as fast and as reliable as possible. However, that did not go so well. And in a lot of ways, the reports blamed the technology for the failure. But I think what's important here is to think about this as more than just a technology failure, because I think a lot of times in project management, when we look at things, we tend to focus on one area when sometimes it's much broader and maybe even more basic in terms of what went wrong. So just to refresh your memory, the problems were far deeper than just the app. So the first plan was to use the app to report results of the caucuses. And you have to remember, in Iowa, there's over 1,700 precincts. So it's not like one spot. It's not like in a building. It is also a one-shot deal. So often in technology, you can roll out in phases and test things. They had a very prominent one-shot option here with this project. So they tried to use the app to report the results. That app failed. And when it failed, The plan B was to call in the results to the caucus headquarters, where volunteers would enter figures into a secure system. And they would use that system, to get into that system, they would use an access code on their phone. But unfortunately, they were told not to bring their phones with them, so they couldn't access that system. So then they told volunteers to call the results in to a central hotline. They were then to send their information into a central hotline and a email address. And the hotline was overwhelmed, obviously, with calls, and the email address wasn't checked until the next morning. So when they got up the next morning, they had 700 emails waiting to be discovered, and people were on the hotline call for several hours. And as news broke about the failure of the system, then outside parties called in to jam the lines, and things just compounded, and it was a basically total meltdown of the system. To compound those issues on the technical side was a communications problem. So the Democratic State Party chair hung up on the campaigns, the various campaigns who were asking questions about what went wrong and when results would be known. And then there was also a press conference with reporters at 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning, where it lasted for 2 minutes and wouldn't take questions. So you have a technology side, you have a process side, and you have a communication side. So there are all these points of a project that broke down in Iowa. So if we wanted to look at these, and we don't have to run through all of these in a lot of detail, but you start to think about project management and project management terms. So in Iowa, you think about scheduling. Why did the technology fail? And this technology company that was developing the app was relatively new. They didn't have a lot of experience, and they also didn't have a lot of time. They had basically just a few months to create an app that was supposed to work to handle this high profile, nation leading election. So when you only have a couple months to develop something, you have a very, very small testing window. And not only was there very little testing, when it was tested, it was hard to use. And then you think about if they have 1,700 precincts and a lot of people volunteering in those precincts, they were not very experienced volunteers. They may not have a lot of experience in technology, and they hadn't tried that app before. So that was new for them as well. And then accessing the app was different too. It wasn't in something like Google Play Store or anything like that. You actually had to go to a different system to download the app. Moving on, and this is just a short list of things that went wrong and could have been prevented. Think about risk management. Party officials knew about some of these delays, and they ignored them. There's also changes in how they reported the information. And as volunteers knew about this app, maybe days in advance, they decided on their own to not use the app and simply call in their numbers from their precincts. So they were acting independently and not working as a team. And thinking about backup hotlines, this was understaffed. If you're going to take calls from hundreds of precincts, they needed more than 40 workers to take those calls. And then getting into the communication, not much was said for the better part of a day. Initial results weren't released. They were doing a different system anyway, so it wasn't just an app. They were reporting more information from the caucuses to make it more real time, to be more transparent from the 2016 election. So there was also additional process change in this project as well. And then kind of the culmination on the communication was just a quote from one of these many articles talking about the project and saying, this may very well be a textbook chapter in communication classes on how not to communicate a crisis. So again, putting those as highlights, where the state party chair hung up on the campaigns, and then having a conference call with reporters that lasted less than 2 minutes and wouldn't take questions. So this is just a reminder that even very, very smart people in the highest stakes can, mismanage projects. And it also highlights, I think, that there are many, many aspects to projects. So it goes through maybe the most important thing, communication, but time, testing, change management, risk management. Those are all cornerstones of good project management. And I thought that this was a good example of a noble goal that quickly went off tracks. And it's a good reminder to, I think, start at just be careful, because there is a lot to consider. And we'll use this kind of as a backdrop of where things can go wrong. So why does project management matter to you? I think when you think about all those elements of Iowa, we see those in everyday parts of our job. And our jobs are becoming increasingly more project-based. So there isn't a day where communication isn't important. You think about the current situation with teleworking, COVID-19 response within your library. How do you manage that? How do you communicate that out to patrons? How do you communicate that out to your staff? How do you engage them? I mean, all of this is being brought to the forefront, and project management seems to be everywhere all the time. So taking a step back, especially in these moments where we might have an ability to invest in some training, an ability to take a look at how do we do our jobs, this might be the perfect time to think about how do these skill sets make a difference in my work? How can they make a difference going forward as well? So we want to start with a few definitions, not getting into too much of the weeds, trying to keep this again kind of high level, but thinking about what is a project. So there are a lot of different definitions for a project, but one of the simplest that we have worked with is looking at a project as being something that is unique. It has a clear start and a finish. It is not routine work, and it has boundaries. So it has a certain scope, specifications, deliverable deadlines, and someone who really cares about it, or someone who is a champion for it. So essentially that takeaway is a set of tasks grouped together with a common goal with those different elements. So when we think about that definition, I just wanted to throw out that first question. So what types of projects have you recently finished or working on now or plan to start in the near future? So Devin, can you throw that out there?
Yeah. All right. So we have summer reading program from Elizabeth, digital collections from Scott. Karen is developing video tutorials for library apps. Virtual summer reading programs from Stacy. Inventory.
Okay.
Someone saying planning a work from home program during a pandemic. Redesign of a web page. Library renovation.
Good. Yeah, a lot of those seem to be, especially thinking about planning a work from home program or even a summer reading program. I would imagine some of that might become even more important now. And I can say that we will touch on some renovation topics today too. Let me get this back here. So we'll try to keep some of those in mind as we go. Video tutorials is one as well, right, Devin?
Yeah, it was. There's a lot of video training, offering, video instruction online or services online as well.
Good. Some things for us at NC State. We, just looking at we have an annual book sale. That is a massive undertaking. So in the spring of every year, We take all the thousands of books that have donated to us throughout the year and put on a book sale. This year is the first year we haven't had it in, decades, but that is a huge project. So events certainly can be that. We are going through a major renovation at NC State, so something that we're handling directly. Someone talked about a web redesign, so we obviously have that in our mix too, and I would imagine that a lot of people have that now, thinking about how do you make sure you respond to more online traffic rather than in-person traffic. One other thing too that we've worked on recently would be something like circulation check-in errors. We have made a concerted effort to reduce the amount of errors we have at check-in, so we reduce the impact on patrons and fines and things like that. All those are types of projects that we have worked on and that require these skill sets of communication, planning, looking at risk management, those types of things. So a project can be very small, it can be very big, like a renovation, but all the elements are going to cross, no matter the size, are going to be there. So then that gets into what is project management. So I wanted to show a quick video of the basics of project management. Let me slide over there real quick. Can you see that okay, Devin?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. What's up with that?
Okay, I don't see the sound though. If you go to
Got it. All right, let's try that again. Sorry about that.
Lots of project managers get their start because they're good at making things happen. But project management is more than showing off your organizational skills and supervising others. It means applying knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to achieve your project's objectives. Project management can be summed up as answering a few crucial questions. The first question you have to answer is, what problem are you solving? Clearly defining what the project is supposed to accomplish is a big step toward making it a success. Legendary baseball manager Yogi Berra's off-kilter take on it is, you've got to be very careful if you don't know where you're going, because you might not get there. The second question is, how are you going to solve this problem? Whether you're solving a problem or pursuing an opportunity, you might have to choose from several possible strategies. Once you've picked your approach, it's time to flesh out your solution, gathering requirements, identifying deliverables, and defining project scope. The next question is, what's your plan? A big part of project management is planning your project. You have to identify the work to be done in detail, how long it might take, the resources you need, and how much they cost. With that info in hand, you can build a schedule of when work should occur. While you're at it, you also need to spell out how you want things to happen in your project, like communication, managing changes, and so on. Some projects seem to go on forever, but eventually someone will pull the plug if it doesn't finish. That's why you also have to answer the question, how will you know when you're done? Clearly defined objectives, requirements, and deliverables help answer that question. But you can eliminate uncertainty by defining success criteria. Quantifiable, measurable results that show that the project is complete, like a certificate of occupancy for construction, or increased productivity measurements after a system is implemented. When you get to the end of the project, you're ready to answer the last question. How well did the project go? This important step is often skipped because everyone is so ready to move on to the next deal. You really need to take time to review the project. What worked well? What didn't? Why? How could we have done better? Project management boils down to answering several questions about your project. What problem are you solving? How are you going to solve it? What's your plan for getting the project done? How can you tell when you're done? And how well did the project go?
All right, so I think that brings up a lot of points to think about, and especially in terms of like the Iowa example we just had. Let me get this back up here. A lot of project management is pretty basic stuff. I mean, these questions are not super in depth, right? What are you going to solve? How are you going to do it? What's your plan? How do you know when you're done? Those are all really basic things. I think what project management comes down to are some really basic ideas that are really hard to execute. That Iowa example, thinking about they know what they're trying to solve, but how they're doing that and what their plan is where it essentially fell apart. You think about process, that includes communication. What's your communication process when they have 1,700 precincts to work across and they have a lot of different change management to go through that, not only on the app side, but also the actual caucus process side too, and bringing that information to the front. And then think about too, this, you know, in the Iowa example, you're done because you have the actual caucus itself, but going back and how well did you do, that is one of the critical points. And one of the ones I want to try to emphasize is after action reviews. So what can we take away from this that we don't do next time? So those are kind of the setup questions of what are you going to do? How are you going to do it? What's your plan to do it? And then assessing how do you know when you're done and how well you did. So those are, I think, are really simple questions. Always the starting point for project management thing. The execution is really hard though. So Devin, I think that brings us to our second question.
Yeah, so
go ahead.
If folks could share, what's your experience with managing projects? Would you rate yourself as high? You've done a lot of project management, working with multiple teams. Medium as in I've done a couple of projects here and there. And then low as in I have no project management experience. I'm brand new to it. All right, we got a lot of folks who are rating themselves as medium. Some rating themselves as high.
Is there a distribution?
I would say the majority are medium right now. 3 or 4 rate themselves as high, and then a couple people rate themselves as low.
Okay, great. How many people do we have here today, just out of curiosity?
We have 50 right now.
50, okay.
50, yeah.
All right, good. So it sounds like we have a variety of projects out there in the works right now, or just completed or on tap, and then we have a decent amount of experience, I guess, with project management. So that's helpful to know. So I might call on people to share as we go through this, their experience either with projects struggles or what they're going through now. So, for those who have experience and a willingness to share, feel free to chime in too. And then I might call for contributions as well. Thinking about project management questions and thinking about the concepts, there are a ton of terms, definitions. Personally, I am not one that gets caught up in definitions. I would much rather focus on those global questions and then the learning elements of it. So, setting your goal, being mindful of scope, what do you want to accomplish and what parameters are you setting around what you're trying to accomplish? And then working with those broader questions about what are you solving, how are you going to solve it, how do you plan to do it, how do you plan to communicate? I think those are the critical things to really lay out, and then try to engage your stakeholders, thinking back to the Iowa example, risk management is huge. Often a question that is missed is, what if we choose to do nothing? I think there's a lot of proposals out there. Sometimes those can be good to move forward on. And sometimes the question is, what if we do nothing? Maybe you hold back, and that is a valid question to always be posed and to think about. Schedules, you think in terms of a response to COVID-19, you don't really have control over a schedule. It happens almost immediately. If you have a response to, say, switch from in-person library services to online library services, that has to happen quickly. But the assessment piece of that is probably even more critical. If you do change operations quickly, you probably want to find out, how are we doing in a fast way too, to be flexible, to adapt to change. So those parts are really important. But two areas today that I really wanted to highlight were before action reviews. So asking the key questions of, what are we trying to do beforehand, and laying out that plan, and then thinking about after action reviews, assessing how did things go after a project. But even maybe more important than that is to ask questions as you are in the project. So making this a routine part rather than a culminating activity, to make it a ongoing activity, to assess every part of that, to hold people accountable, and to take immediate action rather than having a closeout report that then sits on the shelf that isn't actionable. So those are two things that I hope to get to today. And I think that would be really helpful for people. What I'll try to do too in this presentation is provide some documentation that we've developed that will be kind of cheat sheets. As you go back to your jobs, you can refer to these and hopefully apply them and make it more useful as you walk away from this. So again, going back to crucial questions from that clip of, what is project management? So what problem are you solving? How are you going to solve this problem? What's your plan? How will you know when you're done? I mean, these are kind of guiding questions that, again, are simple, but they have very deep layers, and that are kind of your guiding principles as you go through projects. And in that vein, we're looking at different life cycles of project management. So again, the initiating stage, what are you planning to do, or what are you proposing to do? Getting into those other areas of planning, actually doing the project, monitoring the project, and then closing it out. So this project management best practices is a document that we have developed at NC State in collaboration with UNC libraries and Duke libraries. And I just wanted to show that and share that real quick with everyone. Oh, if I can grab the right one.
Most
Sorry
people.
about that. All these boxes are right in my way. It's terrible. All right. So this is a project. Can you see that okay, Devin?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. So this is trying to take you through those different cycles. And again, today what I hope to do is kind of start that resource sharing process. A lot of people already have experience in project management. This might be a document that you can refer to as kind of a cheat sheet as you get into new projects, as you think about, how do we want to approach this? How do we want to refine our approach to project management? So this document is intended to take you through those life cycles of beginning a project. What questions do you want to ask? When you start a project, what are questions you want to ask? You go through project documentation, these are the questions you might want to ask. As you get into a project, again, questions to ask, and ending a project, this is what you might want to consider. I think this is a very holistic document that we've used to go through and really ensure a project success, which is the ultimate goal, right? Is to do a good job and to make sure you're addressing what you need to address. So just for example, to start with this, before you begin is going back to ensuring that a project is absolutely necessary, that you have clear objectives, clear goals. So again, I mean, these are the questions that we see from that clip, like what problem are you trying to solve? Does it have a clear end? And I think one very useful thing would be asking yourself these questions. And then also the additional question is, what if we don't do anything? You know, is that tenable as well? So I just wanted to share this, make sure that you have it. You'll have this presentation after the webinar. And this, I think, is a really helpful document to go back to and take a look at and really consult as you get into more project management and more projects as you go back to work to use going forward. And as a teacher, one of the most important things that I was taught was to beg, borrow, and steal. So there's no shame in taking every resource you have available to you and using it. And that's part of today's webinar, is to give you a couple tools in your tool chest to use and not have to recreate the wheel, but take something that, you know, we have found effective and pass it along, because I think that oftentimes is the most helpful thing. So for example of some of these terms in a use case at the NC State libraries, I also want to take a quick minute and talk about a project that we had last year. The D.H. Hill Library at NC State is one of two major libraries that we have on campus. It is the older of the two libraries, main libraries, and is a mix up of four old buildings. So we have the old Union side, we have two towers that have been built, you know, 10, 20 years apart. And then we have the original library on another side. So there are four buildings that have been put together as one. And we had only one entrance into the building. And that entrance was going to start a renovation last year. So we had to open up our new front door, which would be on the Hillsborough side of our building, which had been shut down for over 30 years. And for 30 years, our students have complained that they only have one entrance into the building, that it really was not helpful for them. So we finally decided to, and we didn't have to decide, we were told to open up that side. That would be the only way into the building. The problem was, again, thinking about schedule and what's in our control, we only had a few months to do this. And so we had to work very quickly. We had to work with many campus partners. We had to work with the architect's office. We had to work with the facilities division. We had to work with the landscaping division, the provost's office for funding and other considerations to open up this entrance, do a complete renovation of it, so it'd be open in time for the closure of our other entrance when the other project began. So we had to work within a matter of months to get this going. And to take a closer look at this floor plan, we had to, where it says open existing floor, there's a foyer here. These doors were shut and closed for 30 years. So we had to reopen this area in red. That was the primary goal. So we knew that. There's a basic, that was the scope. We were going to open those doors and allow people to then pass through this blue area. But if you think about the NC State University libraries, we have thousands of visitors every day, and you can see how small that passage was in the blue area that would not really accommodate people. It would also not meet fire code and other requirements, mandates that we needed in the building. So we not only had to do the red area to open up the doors, we also had to do construction and deconstruction in the blue areas. So that scope was pretty well defined. And we knew how much money we had to do it. We knew the timeline to do it. And we knew the area in which the work had to be done. The problem was when you have so many different stakeholders and when you have so many different wishes, the scope tends to, and so starting to look at, there is a creamery over here. This is where we served ice cream, and the dining operations for the university started to become interested in our renovation project. So if we were having a new front door, that was going to be accessible to the main street for NC State's campus, they also wanted to bring life to our creamery and then convert it into a fancier coffee shop idea. So the scope started to creep a little bit more. And then there's a women's restroom here that is badly outdated. So people said, well, if we're going to have a fancy new door and we might potentially have a fancy new coffee shop, why don't we have a fancy new bathroom? And then there's in purple here an elevator. So if we were going to have a new door, new access, we needed to have a new security desk as well. And we had to then change what was going to happen with that elevator. So I don't know if this sounds familiar to anyone else, but you can see how a simple project to handle a door, renovation quickly starts to expand into all these different things, which gets you into a lot of trouble. Again, in terms of schedule, what has to be done, what's critical, and then what is nice to have, also within the context of resource management. We only have a certain amount of money, so we need to figure out our scope. In the end, we did not do the green, we did not do the orange, we did not do the purple. We did what had to be done, but that was not easy because we had to tell our stakeholders, listen, this is what we need to do for the time being. And then these other projects were put on the back burner. And then now that we are in our new reality of COVID-19 and other that are going to result because of that, we don't know when we can get to those other projects. But I just wanted to highlight that is a renovation project that, has those issues of pretty much all projects: communication, stakeholder engagement, and resource management. And thinking about Iowa, it's not that much different, right? I mean, there are kind of potholes in every project that you face. So like we had a rushed timeline to finish those doors. Iowa had a rush process to get that app out the door. Thinking about training coordination, their backup plans, their communication, the risks, like all those things are, obviously that's on a much broader scale and a much more national scale in terms of coverage and impact, but those elements are alive in every project that you take on and things that you need to be worried about. So I don't know if this might be a good time to throw it open if anyone wants to bring up stuff that they're facing right now in a succinct way, or they could throw it out in chat, or might have something to offer to the group.
Yeah, feel free to share by unmuting yourself, showing your video, or just sending in a chat as well, and I'll read out the chats aloud.
So we will.
Okay, we have a question about teamwork tips. So I think that means like strategies for communicating effectively as a team.
Yeah, I mean, anyone, especially with this group who we have a lot of people with a decent amount of experience in project management can chime in too. I might just start it with thinking about those questions. What's your plan? And that goes back to a communications plan. Thinking about how do you want to communicate as a team? And, for example, I would say this coronavirus response for us personally, this is just how we approached it. Every day was something new. And we did not write down our plan, but we had a series of daily meetings for the first 2 to 3 weeks, and we knew that was appropriate. Since then, we've bumped it back, and it depends on the group, but either that's twice a week now or once every week or once every 2 weeks. So I think, trying to figure out, and I would probably do this more explicitly in a project, but thinking about what's our plan in terms of how often do we meet? Do we have a daily stand-up meeting? Do we have weekly emails that go out to different stakeholders? I know when I worked at the state budget office, we did a series of newsletters to 500 statewide users, but then we broke that down into, team-based communication, stakeholder communication, funder communication, those types of things. So that the different communications channels were based on who we were trying to reach out to. But I think fundamentally is trying to sit down at the front of a project and think about, how are we going to communicate during this project.
We have one other question or response. So right now I'm working with our staff at my public library to plan programs for the summer without knowing what the rules are going to be come June regarding whether our library can be open. It's been really difficult not to be able to plan in advance like I'm used to. It's also difficult to not all be in the same space.
Yeah, I hear you. I think it's, now is even more difficult than ever because it is hard to plan for anything because next week might be different than, we thought. It was really hard for at least my personal experience to even think about what happens next week when this started a month ago because everything changed. I think it goes back to the, trying to think about flexibility and being adaptable in that communication. And I feel like the team is even more important, as you work and be more collaborative, having good people around you, engaging them to be flexible and be responsive is really important. But I would welcome other people's take on that too.
One person wants you to go back to the previous slide to see the issues again.
Yeah. The slide here.
Yeah. I think honestly, if I think all aspects of project management are kind of being changed right now and put under a lot of stress. Like I know that with a project that I've been managing for our search engine marketing, we're kind of at a phase where we've created an infrastructure for it. But it's hard to like sunset it right now. It's hard to let everybody know all the work has been done and start getting into what worked, what didn't. People are kind of being like, oh, we should change this, or, oh, what's our success right now? It doesn't seem like we're doing a lot, so we need to add more things. And so it's kind of hard to communicate as a team. Like, no, it's how do you tell people like it's time for an after action review? We've gone through it, we've assessed it, and we're just kind of doing basic maintenance right now.
Yeah. That's a good point. What I might do, actually, I think that dovetails. I talked about emphasizing before action reviews and after action reviews earlier. So I might just jump ahead in my presentation and, this is the problem. I like to kind of improvise and it's really hard to do in a webinar setting. So this might actually help people, I would think. But there was a really good Harvard Business Review article that I read about after action reviews. So basically, that has influenced a lot of my thinking about after action reviews, and it might be the most important activity or skill set that I could think of right now. And Devin, I think that you bring up really good examples of where it might apply. So after action reviews, often the way I've seen them used so far is when you finish a project, you have like this debrief, and a lot, there is what we did, say with our project management and training. After we completed our first year, we took our cohort of 15 or so people and then did it after action review. So essentially we were asking them, what do you think would happen in this project management training? And they would answer. And then this is all facilitated by a third party. We asked them then what happened and what would you do differently and why? And then thinking about question 3, what worked and what didn't. And then thinking about what would be done differently in the future. This was a very good exercise for us. It was very open. it provided us with a lot of information that we then fed back into the next time we did project management training. The problem with it that I saw was that it was at the end of a 9-month-long process. And what I found in this Harvard Business Review article, and probably what is more important right now, is to do this all the time. So there was, in this article, they were talking about military training. So in the Army, they have a opposing force unit, and that this unit is trained to go out and then train soldiers that are going off to war. So basically they start this article, imagine an organization that confronts constantly changing competitors. It is always smaller and less equipped than its opponents. It routinely is cut with resources. It loses its leaders every year, but it still wins almost every time in these battles. And these are basically, simulated warfare. And the reason why they concluded is after action reviews. So this opposing force is a 2,500 member brigade, and it goes up against more experienced soldiers. It goes up against units that they give away their battle plans. So the opposing force is going against called the blue force, and the blue force knows exactly what the opposing force has done every time, but they still win because what they do is plan ahead. They know what their strategies are. And then in the middle of battle and after every battle, they say, all right, what worked, what didn't, and they apply it. So I thought this was really important. They view everything as an opportunity to learn, and they changed their behavior based on how their strategy was applied and what happened. And some of these things, they had house rules because this is not an easy thing to do. So they wanted everyone to participate. They wanted to make sure no one had thin skins because, this wasn't about placing blame, but it was about being better. And everyone was heavily involved. Everyone was honest, and they were all focused on improving performance, not placing blame. So I think what was important was that this after action review didn't happen at the end of some very long sequence. It happened all the time. And I think right now it might be one of the best takeaways for project management or for responding to uncertainty. This week is going to be different than next week, which is going to be different a month from now or 2 months from now. And it's probably important to stop weekly, bi-weekly, monthly or something and break down, all right, what did we do in the last X amount of time, whatever that time period is. This was our plan. How did we execute it? How did it go versus our expectations? What can we do differently going forward? I think that, rather than being like a culmination and then putting a report on a shelf, this is stuff that actually gets filtered right back into your day-to-day in your responses. And maybe that's the most important thing that I've picked up that would be applicable to today. So I don't know if that resonates with anyone or not, or if anyone has comments or chatter or questions. If you want to know, so what I did about after action reviews to help you is we had a presentation about it. So this will break down the different components of an after action review. And this presentation is taking the approach of kind of a culminating after action review. What do you do at the very end of a project? And these are the types of questions that you can ask. The Google Doc lays out the same thing. It's basically breaking down best practices and after action reviews. This Learning in the Thick of It is that Harvard Business Review article that talks about the opposing force unit. And in that, it talks about more of the, how do you apply it all the time? How do you filter that back into your day-to-day and really apply those lessons? Because they considered a lesson not learned until it is applied back into your management and your day-to-day. So trying to give those resources out there too for you to take a look at and then consult after this webinar.
We have Jennifer sharing that her organization does this at the end of each semester. It's how we prioritize what to fix for next semester and celebrate what went well.
Yeah, no, I think that's great.
This is Jeff from UNC Chapel Hill. We do them as well at the end of projects. We do a lot of postmortems when we're doing just specific things like upgrading a switch or installing a new server new network storage. Just any small little project we're doing. We have these one pagers, we call them, that is kind of just a template for managing the project that goes along with what you've described here. And then we do postmortems for all of those things. We call them postmortems for just those small little projects, but it's very effective. And, you know, it helps people learn who are maybe junior. Hold on, I'm sorry. And my daughter came in. So anyhow, I lost my train of thought. So they're very helpful, and I recommend them. And there are a lot of examples out there that exist on how to do them effectively. Sometimes we'll even do them during what we call a sprint planning meeting. Those of you who aren't familiar with agile development, there's something we use called sprint planning. Sometimes we'll actually do them when a specific large task is completed in a project, even though the project's not done. And with that, I will stop talking.
No, that's great, Jeff. I mean, I think it's a really helpful comment. I think probably even more important now is to do this with more repetition and more timeliness, especially in our environment now. The more you can probably break down what just happened to apply lessons going forward is really important. And it's probably more critical too, as we're all separated by space and time, to have maybe a little bit more of these documentations of what went well, what didn't, and how can we apply that to, you know, the next 2 hours or the next day or the next week, whatever it is now, because everything is changing so absolutely fast. And some of those things that you were talking about, I mean, some of that work is either on hold or delayed or is going to be accomplished differently now than it was before. So how do you deal with that? All right. Is there other comments out there right now, or?
No, I think that's it so far.
All right. Well, we're close on time too, so feel free to throw it out. If you got something on your mind, feel free. I kind of jumped around my whole presentation here. The other part was thinking about before action reviews. So that is getting in, you know, which might be a good thing to think about before a major effort begins now. As we talk about uncertainty, you know, the questions there are, what are you trying to accomplish? What do you think will change? And how will you know if you be successful? Thinking about how might you fail and what if you don't act? I think some of those are really important questions now too, because what you think is appropriate now may not be appropriate in 2 months. And like, what's your timeline and how do you want to respond? I think things are so fluid today in our environment that probably the before action and after action reviews are two of the keys that I think are most applicable, you know, with the changing coronavirus situation and, you know, the next 2 to 6 months or even longer, you know, what are we going to be facing? So that kind of threw me all out of order. I'm not sure if there's anything there. There is some more information in the presentation, but I don't think it's worth our time to explore right now. You know, the ending here with the last few minutes, you know, was trying to look at thinking if anyone had more questions about what they struggle with, or if they want to throw it out to the group, because it might be the best to share, like Jeff did, anything that other people are doing that may be helpful to a particular problem, need, or thought that people are working on. And if not, if people are thinking about that too, maybe I'll just give you a second if you can throw it into chat. Tools, just a sidebar on tools. I'm not down on tools, but I think that when we did our training at NC State, people thought that tools were a magic bullet solution, and they're so often not. I think it's going back to, you know, those basic questions, thinking about communication, thinking about teamwork, and there's a good way to connect, you know, with Trello and some of these other things, but they're not the end all be all, and don't replace kind of those basic skills too. So be cautious of, like in Iowa, having an app or a tool save you, because it could also go the other way, you know.
Yeah, I think so. In terms of struggling with working on a project, Timothy's sharing, in my experience, people don't like to discuss why a project might fail beforehand.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely understand that, because I think people can see it as being like negative to call it a problem, or, you know, what's not going to work. I think it kind of gets in the way of certain personalities who are very vision oriented and optimistic in a good way.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the takeaways too from the military review example, was that there's no thin skins, but that is such a hard thing to accomplish. Everyone, you know, is going to run into, I mean, the human side of these problems, which is often the most difficult. So that is a true challenge.
Another one that came up is project scope creep can become unmanageable and a huge barrier to progress.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what I tried to show with our renovation project. Scope creep is a massive problem, and then trying to get a handle on it without alienating stakeholders, or if you do accept scope creep, the resource problems or scheduling problems that it causes downstream, those are definitely things to be mindful of always.
Another comment was the key is that project management offers a framework to follow, but not something that's fixed in stone. You should organize this framework to meet your needs.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think Josh should teach the next project management webinar. I think he's got a job. Yeah, I mean, this is, to me, you know, it is an art, not a science, you know, and I think now more than ever, project management skills are in demand as much as the flexibility, you know, to respond to changing work needs. So what I try to set up here is just, you know, kind of a very high level start. But as in most things, it's what you make of it. So I hope you can use the resources that are shared today. Feel free to reach out to me too. My email is at the back of this presentation, which you'll have in a little bit. But if you have questions about our content or what we did, I also, like, you know, the UNC example of the one pager in postmortems would be interesting to have a copy of, because like I said, my roots started as a teacher. I love to beg, borrow, and steal. And there's no way I'm the smartest guy in this room. So, you know, I would welcome, you know, what other people are doing.
Yeah, that would be really great to share, Jeff. Thanks so much. One person has a question about sharing resources. If everybody's kind of ready to head out and has gotten what they needed out of this and doesn't really want to share, I'll go into housekeeping. Feel free to send things in the chat too if anything comes up. But I'm going to be sharing out the resources later today, along with a recording of the webinar and a follow-up survey. I'll make sure also to have links in that email about how to find our training calendar for upcoming skills-based webinars, how to sign up for our listserv so that you can stay in touch with all the different online learning that we're offering. There's a lot in the works right now that I don't have completely finalized yet. So do get familiar with that and sign up so that you know. And then you'll have my email. Joe's email will be in his presentation slides, which I'll send out in that follow-up. And yeah, feel free to reach out at any point if you have any questions come up. I can forward them to Joe or he can respond directly. But thanks so much for being here today. I'm glad that so many people came on the call, and this is really great. This is a really great start. Thanks so much, Joe, for offering to do this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you everyone for your time.
Yeah, oh, we have one suggestion here about continuing this training. But yeah, we'll see kind of what we're offering in the next couple of months. But yeah, thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah, that's great. Everyone stay safe and hang in there.
All right, I'm gonna end this meeting. Thanks, y'all.